Thank you for that lovely introduction, Jeff. Now I'm going to, is this working? Oh, it's working for you, but it's not a mic. Is that what you mean?
No, we're waiting for a replacement mic.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. I'll do my best. So if you're not hearing me, someone let me know. And I don't know how good you can hear when I'm facing that way. So we'll try and do our best. Please put your hand up if you need me to repeat anything. And if time, I'll give you an update on House with No Peers, because a bit has happened since. Let's go, Jeff. Great. So 4 things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to stop about halfway. So at about past or a little bit after, I'll stop because we'll all be eating by then once the food arrives, and then I'll come back and finish off and then have time for questions. I'm going to just run through what's going on with engineers registration around Australia to start with, and then the new property developer reforms in the ACT, which I've been heavily involved in, which I think are really quite fantastic and potentially a model that I know other jurisdictions are interested in following. And then the new New South Wales Engineers Practice Standard, which will start in September. Any of you working in New South Wales will be caught by this if you're registered in New South Wales, if you're required to hold registration, which is engineers working in Class 2, 3 and 9 buildings. And then I'm going to talk about the latest case study that I did. When I say latest, it was published about this time last year, and it's to do with a development called the Otto Building in New South Wales, Otto 2 in particular. There were 2 towers or 2 owners' corporations. There were actually a lot more than 2 towers. And the particular sort of most notable defect there was to do with the balconies, hence the name. So let's go. Engineers registration. So when I did the building confidence report with Peter Shergold in 2017, it was published in 2018. At that time, we had 4 jurisdictions in Australia that registered engineers, although most people thought that it was just Queensland that registered engineers back then, but of course it wasn't. You'll all know that Victoria's had registered engineers in the building space since 1993 at least. And the Northern Territory and Tasmania also had registration for engineers. So about half of the jurisdictions had registration. Queensland, of course, has always been thought of as having the most comprehensive scheme because it registers around about 37 different disciplines of engineering that go well beyond the building industry up there in Queensland. And the Victorian, Northern Territory and Tasmanian schemes were focused on engineers involved in the building industry. We said in the building confidence report that engineers involved in the building industry ought to be registered, that they were an important part of a practitioner in the chain, and that it was necessary to bring accountability, make sure we had the right levels of qualifications and skills in this area, and that the work of engineers was a very important part of the process that needed to be part of the regulatory regime. And that's been taken up. So we don't yet have registration in every jurisdiction, but every jurisdiction has committed to introducing it. So New South Wales quite quickly after the Building Confidence Report started the registration of Class 2s and then introduced 3s and 9s after that, about 12 or 18 months later. And that was off the back of course, David Chandler, the Building Commissioner in New South Wales, who was behind the creation of the Design Building Practitioners Act and the RAB Act, which is the Residential Apartment Buildings Compliance and Enforcement Act. And I'll mention those a couple of times again tonight because of the influence that they're having on some of the other issues we're talking about. The Victorian scheme was refurbished in 2019 and now does apply beyond building industry to other disciplines of engineering. So it went from being licensed or registered through the Victorian Building Authority. Now the registration, as you'll know, sits with Consumer Affairs, although you still need to have an endorsement to do work in the building industry. In March 2025, the ACT's program will commence. So they've from 1 July, you can start to apply for registration in the ACT, but by March next year, you will have to be registered in order to practice in the ACT. WA is coming online as well, but not for a little while. So July 26 for structural and fire safety disciplines, and then a year later for civil and mechanical. I don't know why it's taking them so long, but in any event, by the time Western Australia gets their scheme in place, it'll be 10 years since the Building Confidence Report. And I think WA, I think that's the acronym for wait a while. That's what I'm told. And so this would be consistent with that. South Australia is going to introduce, but they haven't said when yet. They really only started looking into it last year and had some consultation work out. But they have announced that they will be introducing engineers registration over there as well. And I've put Northern Territory, New Zealand up there, just because, you know, we do lots of things with New Zealand. They have the title protection. So a bit like we have for architects here, title protection, but no registration, although we do register architects in Australia, but we only give them title protection. Next slide. The Wait a While scheme from WA. The only reason I've put this up on the board mostly is because if you are interested in what Western Australia are doing, the last line there, the Vimeo video, it goes for about 5 minutes and it takes you right through how the Western Australian scheme will work when it's being introduced and those sorts of things. So they're requiring registration for civil, structural, fire safety and mechanical engineers, only for the building industry. They're not going beyond that. And they're going to have registration for contractors and individuals. They've got these three categories: professional, technologist and associate. My understanding of them, and they are referenced in that little video, the technologist is somebody that is working with prescribed standards, which is kind of interesting. I guess it's deemed to satisfy stuff, which is sort of curious to me, because all of the other schemes describe engineering services as services that don't involve prescribed analysis, that are more to do with applying engineering principles, so more to do with performance-based decision-making in my sort of understanding of it. But anyway, if you do want to look at the WA one, go and check out that video. Next slide. You won't probably be able to read this, and you guys definitely won't be able to, but what's on the slide there is a little bit of a matrix that tells us for each jurisdiction which disciplines of engineering are covered. And civil, what you can see in the table, if you can see it, there's three, ACT, South Australia and WA are in blue because they're not yet commenced, but we're sort of seeing that there's a reasonable overlap, but one of the confusing things for everybody will be, you know, which disciplines are covered in which jurisdiction, and do I need registration in one place where I might not need it in another. So, for example, electrical engineering, you don't require that in the Northern Territory, but everyone else is requiring it. And there's also a couple there, like a geotechnical, hydraulic and building systems engineers that are picked up in the definition in some places as civil engineers, in other places they're categories in their own right. So it's all a bit confusing. That's a little bit of a snapshot of it up there for you. But the other point that I've made on the slide is that automatic mutual recognition will mean that you don't necessarily have to go and get yourself registered everywhere. So we had, we have had for a long time a thing called, yes?
Sorry to interrupt. This is licensing authority, you're saying, and I'm registered in Queensland or in New South Wales.
Yes.
I'm some sort of pseudo engineer now.
Yes.
I have to get re-registered.
Oh.
Completely. And it's contrary to what they're saying.
Yes. Well, the thing about let's talk about mutual recognition first, because that's been around for a long time. And what that allowed in a whole bunch of different occupations was that you could go to a new jurisdiction. So let's say you're a Victorian, you want to go work in Western Australia, you can apply for mutual recognition. And if your registration is equivalent to a category that they have in Western Australia, they will recognise you, and you don't have to do any other courses or qualifications, but you still will need to pay a registration fee and be registered. So that's mutual recognition. They can't make you do anything else, provided that it's equivalent. Automatic mutual recognition is where you don't even have to go and get registered in the other jurisdiction. You just simply have to notify them that you're doing work in their jurisdiction. So they've got a record that you're there, but you don't have to pay a registration fee. You can just be mutually recognised. So that's rolling out across the country and across all sorts of occupations, not just in the building industry. And I'm not, there is a whole presentation or at least a bit more time you could spend how that's working. But what it does mean, I guess, as we have these new schemes come on board, and if you are working across jurisdictions, is that hopefully you will be able to have automatic mutual recognition or mutual recognition at the very least. So Queensland at the moment has decided that it does not want to participate in automatic mutual recognition. So if you wanted to work in Queensland, you would still have to go and register in Queensland. Yeah. So it's an interesting space. Next. All right. So that's it for the registration stuff. If anyone's got any questions, otherwise I'm moving on to the second topic. You're all good? Yes.